Okay, so today I want to talk about how to get Symfony to the next level. And honestly, I have more questions than answers, really. So next year, Symfony will turn 10. Yeah. I mean, that's big. Symfony and all the components are downloaded millions of times every month now. And Symfony is used by more and more open source projects. So that's very good news for Symfony. And the Symfony 3.0 roadmap has just been announced recently. So that's also a big news for the Symfony world. It's going to be released in November next year, so in a year from now. And meanwhile, I'm still merging almost all the pull requests. I'm still in charge of all the releases. I'm also moderating the mailing list and more. Of course, I'm not alone. A lot of people help, actually. So we have more than 1,000 different developers who at some point contributed something to Symfony. We do have a core team now. We have developers reviewing pull requests, managing issues, helping other developers on RRC or on the mailing list, people talking about Symfony at conferences, people organizing meetups everywhere in the world, people helping other open source projects convert to the Symfony components, or just developers advocating Symfony in their own companies. But still, the question is, how can we make Symfony scale? How can we scale the Symfony project, but also the Symfony community? And this talk is more about starting a conversation within the community rather than me giving definitive answers. So I want us to define the next step. I want the Symfony community to actually take control of its own destiny. And getting to the next level does not necessarily mean writing more code or more documentation or doing more stuff. I think it's all about the experience that you get when working with Symfony. And it starts with the first experience. The very first time you say, OK, I'm going to try Symfony. So you want to try Symfony, you want to download, install, create a new project, read some documentation. And yeah, is it easy enough? Or is it too complex? So actually, I asked the question on Twitter yesterday. And I think people, mostly they say, OK, we have great documentation. We have a lot of documentation, actually. We all think that Composer is helping a lot here, obviously, to manage dependencies. We think that Symfony is much better than it was a couple of years ago, probably. But are we sure that the first experience is great for newcomers? And I'm pretty sure that there is room for improvement. And so I talked about the Twitter poll I organized yesterday. About 200 people answered yesterday, and here are the results. So most people think that the first experience is a good one, right? But you can see that 20% of developers are frustrated with their first experience with Symfony, or they were frustrated, actually. So that's good news, right? Actually, I'm not so sure. First, because the people who answered are the ones who follow me on Twitter, so they are probably more experienced developers. They know Symfony. They've been using Symfony for quite a while now. So I'm not sure this is really the reality. And I think I can prove that actually it's not that easy. So here is the download page on the Symfony.com website as of 2011, so 3 years ago. It was the most simple download page we ever had. Composer did not exist at that time, and we only had one version, basically, 2.0. But still, you had to choose between 4 different archives. So do I need to download the zip or the TGZ? Or do I need to download the archive with vendors or not? It's not very clear. So it's very difficult to figure out which one is the right one for me, right? It's great to have several options, but you need to help people decide which one is the best for them. And as you can see here, there is a small note saying that if you have Git, then you need to download the version without the vendors. But then what? What does it mean? I have Git, but then what? And we don't say anything about the fact that after downloading the version without the vendors, you need to actually install all the dependencies. So you need to figure that out yourself. So at some point, 2012, we decided to add this small text installation instructions to explain the next steps after downloading the archive. And we say that, I don't remember what is it, but yeah, if you download Symfony 2 without the vendors, it adds a bit of more flexibility for whatever it means. Do I need this flexibility? I don't know. So it's quite confusing, really. And then we ask people to actually read the README file, which makes sense. Still no composer, only one version of Symfony, probably easier than the previous version, as we tell developers how to get started faster, but not simple enough. It gets worse. That's 2013. We added support for Composer on the download page, as you can see here, PHP Composer.far, create project, something. But we also started to have more than one version of Symfony. So the number of options became, overwhelming, really. Which version of Symfony should I download? 2.0, 2.1, 2.2? I don't know. I have no idea. Then, do I need to use the archives or Composer? And by the way, the instructions are still just for the archives, so must be the preferred way, right? Because this is the only one which is actually documented. Actually, that's not the case, because we all know that just using Composer makes everything happen automatically. So we don't really need those instructions, but still, it's very difficult to figure out. And of course, there is also a slight problem with the archives that includes the vendors. The ICU ENTL problem. How many of you are aware of this ICU ENTL problem? Okay, not that many. Just a few. So more about the ICU problem later on. I'm going to talk about that a bit. And the thing is, so if you are not aware of the problem, you install the dependencies for your project. You deploy on your production servers, and at some point it doesn't work anymore. And you don't know why. It's very difficult to debug. Okay, so that's all the incremental changes that we made during the years on the download page. We know that Composer is the way to go, but we still have the archives. We know that the ICU problem is a big problem, but a bunch of people know how to actually work around the problem. So that's not a problem for me, that's not a problem for a bunch of people, but that's a big problem for the rest of us. So we managed to screw up big ways, actually. And when I asked yesterday the question about if creating a Symfony project is easier now than it was a couple of years ago, a lot of people said, yes, it is. I think it's not. I mean, not until, actually, we changed the page a couple of months ago, or perhaps a bit more, don't remember, but it's very recent. So I lied a bit. This is what we have now, 2014. I think it's much better now. So last year, during the conference, the SymfonyCon conference, we announced that we wanted to redesign this download page from scratch. That's just one page, but it is probably the most important page on the Symfony.com website. So we took a lot of time trying to figure out how to simplify the experience for the developers. So it took us a while to get there, but I think we now have a much better download page. So we don't bother you with tons of version. You choose between the long-term support version, so stability really, or you want to get the latest one with the latest features. Simple enough. And then you use Composer. But we did keep the archives somehow. So as you can see here, evaluating Symfony, and if you evaluate Symfony, we tell you to download this archive. So just one version, the latest version, one format, the zip format. Too bad if you need to download a larger package if you are on Linux or on the Mac, because zip is quite large. But anyway, you have just one zip to download. And yes, we still have the ICU problem. So the ICU problem is quite difficult to understand. So some Symfony components, mainly the form component, rely on ENTL and the ICU data. So for instance, if you have a form with a list of countries, for instance, you are relying on the ICU data. The ENTL extension is available by default in PHP, but it is quite complex to install, which means that most of the time it's not enabled by default. So if you're on Mac or Linux, you don't necessarily have ENTL enabled. And not all servers actually have it enabled. For those people, we needed a way to emulate ENTL, right, so that they can use Symfony. So we developed a PHP library that actually replaces the ENTL extension and the data, but only for the English language. So the experience is not totally the same. So if you are just developing a Symfony website with the English local, that's fine. If not, it's not really something that you can use. So you need to install the ENTL extension. The problem is that we decided to detect ENTL support when running Composer. So when you run Composer install or Composer update, we figure out if you have ENTL installed or not, and we install the PHP library or not. So you can imagine if you have ENTL installed on your local machine, you don't have the PHP library, then you decide to deploy on your production machines, you don't have ENTL enabled, and it breaks. Not right away, because this is just the form where you have a country selector, right? So it can take days or weeks to actually find a problem. And at this point, trying to find out why there is a problem is very difficult. Okay, so what about the archives? The archives are actually created on a machine with ENTL support, which means that if you download this archive and you don't have ENTL support enabled on your laptop, it won't work, which is really bad. So those archives are broken for you. I won't talk more about this issue because we fixed it actually some time ago. So now we can, build the dependencies on any machine and deploy on any other machine. We don't rely on Composer to figure out ENTL for us. It has been fixed in all Symfony versions, so you need to use those versions of Symfony if you want a version without the problem. So what is the next level? Having only one great way to install a new Symfony project would be great. Now we have two, the Composer way and the archive. So what's wrong with Composer? Nothing, really. It's great. But the perceived complexity is high. Whenever you type, I don't even remember, create, it's not create, actually it's create-project. It was too big for the slide. Symfony Framework Standard Edition blog, it's very long, it's not that easy to remember. And then it outputs a lot of text. I don't care, I just want to create a new Symfony project, but it tells you that it's going to install a bunch of dependencies, and then it asks a bunch of questions. I don't really care at this point, I want to create a new project, I don't want to answer the questions. I don't know the answers, actually. So it's not really a Composer problem. The problem is that we are using Composer for something totally different. We want to create a project, and I think Composer is not the right tool to actually create projects. And again, most of us, they know how to do that. It's not a problem. But if you ask people who actually know nothing about Composer, nothing about Symfony, it's very hard for them. And then the last problem is that it's very, very, very slow. A couple of weeks ago, I was in San Francisco in a small hotel with a very interesting internet connection. And I tried to create a project with Composer. It did not work. I tried several times, timed out, stuff. It was really a nightmare. I was not able to create a project, and that's a problem. It was not, you know, it was in San Francisco, big city. It didn't work. So, all those things increases the perceived complexity of creating a Symfony project. But it does not have to be this way. So that's why at some point we decided to create a Symfony installer. That's something new. You can get more information on this GitHub repository. It's not stable yet. But it does one thing, and it tries to do it well. Creating new Symfony projects. That's all. There is a small video. So we download the right archive for you, the smallest possible one, with all the vendors. Now it's possible because we don't have the NTL problem anymore, right? We don't bother you with questions. We actually tell you what to do next, what you can do, what you need to do. I think it's easy enough. So the output is also optimized for Symfony usage. And of course, you can then use Composer update if you want, just works. And there is one more thing. You can't see it on the screen, but it also runs the requirements checks for Symfony. So if your machine is not configured to work with Symfony because you have some missing PHP extensions or the configuration in your php.ini file is not the right one, it's going to warn you, saying, okay, you need to fix this or upgrade PHP or whatever. So it knows a lot of things about Symfony. And we are thinking about adding more Symfony-related things here. Not sure yet, but one idea would be to provide the cache clear command, for instance. We all know that this command does not really work, especially when we try to upgrade Symfony, because when you upgrade Symfony to the next version, we might have new configuration settings or stuff like that. And if you try to run this command, it's not going to work because we need to boot the old kernel to create a new one, and that's kind of a mess. If we can extract this code outside of Symfony, it would solve the problem. And of course, that would be the birth of the Symfony toolbed instead of the Symfony installer. So we wanted to start small, just doing one thing, and then trying to figure out if we can do more. So I think you get the idea. We need to step back, think about what we can improve for newcomers, for people, for less experienced developers. Things that seem very easy for us are not for the vast majority of PHP developers. We learned everything because, in an incremental way. So we started small, just Symfony, then we added Git, we added Composer, we added a lot of stuff. So it was kind of easy for us. But for someone who knows nothing about our ecosystem, it's very difficult to understand. And again, a majority of people think that the installer is useless. Yes, probably for them, but not for everyone. And I think, and hopefully, you understand why we actually create the installer. Oh, by the way, the best practices book is also a step in that direction. And some people actually misunderstood the goals of this initiative. But the book is trying to give you simple directions for less experienced developers, people trying to get a sense for Symfony, or just for simple projects. So I'm not going to talk about all the best practices. They are online, so you can read the book now on the symfony.com website. But the fact that we advocate the fact that you only need one bundle, it means a lot. It means that a bunch of questions just disappears. You don't have those questions anymore. There is one true bundle. The fact that you need to name your services with short names. It's a small thing, but it changes everything. Your code is more readable. And a bunch of stuff, yeah, making your controllers extend the default controller, the base controller for Symfony. It helps a lot. You have a lot of shortcuts. And if you have an IDE, you have all the auto-completion, so that's great to actually discover what Symfony can do for you. And so those recommendations, I think, make a lot of sense for newcomers, for simple projects, and I think actually for the vast majority of projects created with Symfony. And then you have a few projects or open source bundles. They are different, but we need to document the right way for the vast majority of people using Symfony. And of course, we can do more. We need to do more. What about Docker, for instance? Docker is a great way to create new machines. We probably can do something with it. And the goal is always the same, trying to simplify the experience of new developers. So I've talked a lot about the download page on Symfony.com website, but of course, Symfony.com is more than just this page. And last year, I asked Javier to talk about the Symfony.com improvements that we were about to do. And this year, I asked him to do the same. So please welcome Javier on stage.
Good morning, everyone. As Fabien said, I'm here today to talk about Symfony.com website because it's by far the most important channel, communication channel that we have with you, the Symfony community, so it's very important for us, right? We're going to talk about the past, the present, and the future of Symfony.com. So, regarding the past, what have we done this year? A lot of things, actually. First of all, we redesigned it a bit, the website. It's not a big deal, but the new design is probably much better than the old one, right? And we also added a lot of new contents, not only best practices, but a lot of blog posts, articles, and the traffic in the website is keeping growing a lot, so we're really happy with that. It seems that you like the new contents of the website. And we are also adding a lot of new sections, right? Like the new job board, which is the official place to look for or post Symfony-related job offering, right? And obviously, one of the latest sections is the marketplace, which is the official directory to find any product, service, company related to Symfony and the ecosystem of Symfony. And this is the latest new section of the website, which is at dx.symfony.com, which is the DX dashboard, which is the tool we use to manage all the activity that is being generated around the DX initiative started by Ryan. There is a lot of activity there, and we need a tool to manage that, right? So you can check it out and see the details of this new section. Okay, so what's next? Mainly two things. First, we want to publish many more case studies about Symfony. We know that a lot of companies are doing great things around Symfony, and not everyone knows that, okay? When we publish this case study about the company serving 1 billion requests with Symfony every week, all people love that case study. Okay? So we want to publish much more case study. Then, we believe in this phrase, the open source is not something that you consume, it's something that you take part in, right? So another thing that we want to do, we don't really know still how to do that, but we want to give more credit to all the companies that are giving back to the Symfony project. Okay, it doesn't matter if you publish open source bundles or you organize a meetup or event or whatever. Whatever your company does, we want to highlight that. Okay, so contact us and tell us what your company is doing around the Symfony project and what is giving back to the community. Okay? And the last point, the future, what is coming very soon, next year. Again, it's about giving you more promotion, showing your great work, and there is something that is not easy to find out, which is which websites are done with Symfony. We know that there are huge and great websites done with Symfony, but it's not easy to find out them. Okay, so we want to promote the websites that you are doing, and for that, we're introducing a new section in the website, which will be the Symfony Showcase. Okay. It's going to be the official directory of all the websites done with the Symfony ecosystem tools. Not only the full stack framework, obviously, but components or tweaks, silers, or whatever you use around Symfony, you can list your website here. There will be a lot of categories, and each website will have detailed description of how it's done and how are they using Symfony and the tools, the technologies used. And also, we'll show this. The rating. You will be able to rate those websites. Why? Why is this important? Because we'll use those rates for this, for the Symfony Awards. Starting next year, we're going to grant these awards every year, and we'll use the rates from the showcase to know which one is winning in each category, right? So, prepare your websites, take beautiful screenshots, because the Symfony Showcase is coming, and it's coming very, very soon. Okay, thank you.
So, of course, code without documentation is nothing. And we are very lucky. We are very lucky because we have great documentation. And everyone is actually busy right now updating the documentation for Symfony 2.6, and we have a great team of people helping, writing documentation, reviewing pull requests, and doing a lot of stuff, really. And during the last year, we did great changes. We added the Symfony Best Practices book. We are about to add my Creating Your Own Framework tutorial to the official doc so that people can find it more easily. And of course, when talking about documentation, we should mention Ryan. He's a great guy. He's been managing the documentation since day one of Symfony 2, actually. So it's been 4 years or something. So that's why I asked him to talk a bit about his vision about the documentation, when we are and where we want to go. So please welcome Ryan on stage.
Hey guys, good morning. All right, so first, the docs. I want to think about the docs as not an extension of Symfony project, but its own actual open source project. It has its own repository on GitHub, has its own team, so we are our own thing. We have a very simple, small, humble mission, which is to document 170,000 lines of code that's constantly changing because the community is constantly adding new features and changing things. And we basically want to document all of that and have that be friendly and understandable and readable. Part of going through this was really fun for me because I got to look up some stats. So right now, via my methods of trying to figure this out, we have over 3 million words in the documentation, 350 individual chapter pages, 2,000 code blocks, over 2,000 code blocks, and almost 10,000 commits have been made to the documentation, which no one even likes writing normally. We've done this with, on that note, almost 1,000 contributors. If you look at the contributions since 2011, so the contributions of the last 4 years, Fabien is actually 5th on the list. So this is not a Fabien-dominated project. This is actually a community-dominated project. Again, it's its own ecosphere, its own thing. So one of the things we like to be is, Javier says that maybe I made an overstatement on this slide, possibly. I'm going to say that we are the nicest open source project in the entire galaxy. And this is an example here, which has nothing to do with me. See a couple of interesting things here. One, if you look at the top, you can see that this was created by hitting the edit button on the documentation. So that was one nice thing that the Symfony.com team, not me, did. there's an edit button so people can actually take action immediately from the documentation. Another thing is we now have a core team. So once 5 years ago, Fabien wrote the documentation, then I wrote the documentation. Now there's actually 3 core team members and many other people that help with the documentation. And there's a process that comes. So if you submit to the documentation, you're going to get several people that are going to give you feedback. And I guarantee that feedback is actually going to be really nice and really friendly. Because if you should be able to contribute anywhere, it should be to the documentation, even if English isn't your native language. So here you can see we have a pull request format that you're supposed to put inside of the body of your pull request. This has nothing, and it doesn't matter. This was a great little fix. So you can see it got really nice feedback, and it got merged in quickly. 2 other things that happen as part of the process is we have Travis CI that runs on every pull request. What? How do you have tests that run for your pull request? Well, there's actually formatting. So when you make a pull request, if you're worried about messing up the formatting, then it's going to catch you on that, so it's not going to be a problem. Nobody fails Travis CI more than me. I fail Travis CI constantly, and it catches me. The last thing is, since Symfony is changing so often, there's even a process in place to make sure that when new features go into Symfony, they go into the documentation. So as part of the collaboration between the 2 projects, when you make a new pull request to Symfony Core, one of the categories you need to fill in is where your issue or pull request is over on the documentation. And this makes sure that we actually keep in sync with everything, which, even though Symfony is about to get version 2.6, the pace is incredibly fast. The number of new pages and new features that we documented for 2.6 was incredible. There's lots of new stuff. So mostly I want to talk about where we go from here. We have lots of documentation, but that's not enough. This is not something where 4 years later I want to sit and say, wow, we've done a nice job. There's a lot there. First thing is, I want to answer every question of how do I do X? So whenever we solve a problem, how do I store sessions in the database? Whenever we have those questions, I want to answer those in a very direct way on the documentation. And this involves you guys because we are the ones that are actually asking those questions. So as you are solving problems, you need to think, was that difficult for me to solve? And could it have been solved easier if I could find something in the docs? Or if even some simple change were made to the docs? And of course, I don't want to answer every how should I question, but I want to answer the very important ones because it comes back to that experience. If there's something that 70% of developers need to do with Symfony, and that's not immediately easy to find when you Google for it and find a documentation page, then we're failing 70% of the users. So we need to answer those real world questions in a very direct way so that we can actually get our work done. Things should also be simple to understand. So if we documented every feature inside of Symfony, that wouldn't be enough. Because what I don't want is this boring manual that nobody can actually read and nobody can understand except for the 2 people that actually originally wrote it. It's totally unacceptable. Yes, first and foremost, we need to actually document the things, but they must be simple. Another nice thing, if we can't document something in a simple enough way, a lot of times that encourages us to make code changes. And actually the developer experience is part of that. If you document something, it's still not easy, well then maybe we can use that to fuel some upstream changes on the code base itself. And of course, things need to be easy to understand, or easy to find, accurate, and fun to read, because why not, right? I want people to actually be able to go through the documentation. Right now, we're actually rereading every single page in the documentation, all 350 pages or so. Because some of them are as old as 4 years. They need to be updated. They need to be simpler, more fun. We have better practices on doing that. So that's a process that's going on right now. So going up to the next level, it's about these things. It's about doing these things better. And it's about all of you guys helping to, if nothing else, challenge us on these. Challenge us when something isn't simple enough, isn't easy to find, is missing. Challenge us when something's boring to read. If we're not fast enough, challenge us on that. One of the improvements that's being made right now, not by me, but by one of the core contributors, Wouter, is he's actually making a documentations bot, which we still need a clever name for, maybe DocsBot, something. Something where you make a pull request, and similar to the core, it's actually going to look at all of our rules. We have rules like you should have a line break after the first word that crosses the 70-second character. Cool, but now we can have a bot that's going to take care of that stuff automatically. So again, the call to action for us getting to the next level is not being satisfied with this, and for all of you guys to help me challenge us, and even go a step further and help us fix it. But if nothing else, it's when it comes to the documentation, if you create an issue, that's not complaining. That's you raising a flag and saying, this is not good enough for our documentation. This needs to be clear, it needs to be simpler, it needs to be easier to find. So, thank you guys very much.
So the Symfony project is made of code, documentation, but more importantly, Symfony is a community. A community of developers, of course, but also a community of other open source projects. Everyone knows that Symfony is used by many other open source projects. That's great, but how can we help them grow? How can we help them get to the next level as well? So I talk with a lot of lead developers, people working with other open source projects using Symfony, are trying to understand what they need from us, how we can help them. And today I asked Yoav Kuttner to come and talk about OroCRM. OroCRM is a project based on the Symfony full stack framework. You might know Yoav as he is the main guy behind the Magento project, so it's kind of interesting to hear about his story and why he decided to actually use Symfony instead of Zen Framework for his new open source project. So please, welcome on stage, Yoav.
Hello. Okay, it's on. Thank you, Fabien. Thank you for having me here. I'm not going to talk on why we're not using Zen Framework because I'll have too many people after me after that. And like Fabien said, I did start the Magento project in 2007 after co-founding the Magento company. And first of all, it's an honor to be here. I see it's a true developer conference, and I know that because I'm the only one wearing a jacket. But that's because I promised my wife, so I'll try to. So it's great to be here. When we started Magento, we actually looked for a framework that we could use to build and actually build the product that we wanted. And back then in 2007, if you all remember, it wasn't so easy. There was so many frameworks that was very hard to choose. We ended up choosing Zen Framework, which was still in beta, and we paid a big price for that. The price is because it was in beta, a lot of the features were not complete, and we ended up owning a lot of those features, actually reinventing the wheel every time we needed something that was not supported from the framework. So after leaving Magento, basically in 2012, shortly after the acquisition by eBay, I started thinking about creating a new company, a new product, and I was eyeing the CRM field, the open source CRM. I think it needs some new product out there, and that's what we started doing. But for that, again, we understood that we need to find a good framework because we did not want to create our own framework, again, like we did with Magento initially. So we looked around, and pretty fast we fell in love with Symfony 2. I think what we were looking for was found right here. First is that it's complete. It had all the major features we were looking for, and it was mature. It was being used already in live projects. It was being already developed for a few years, 10 years almost like we hear now. So that made our decision kind of easier to know that it's being used, it has the features we want. It's also very modular, very flexible, allowing us to build our product the way we want it to and not feel too limited. But it comes with performance, which usually you will not find together if you look at some of the flexible frameworks out there. So performance, modularity, and flexibility is something that definitely helps us. And as you saw Ryan here, what we loved about you guys is the energy in your community. I think it's really, really important, of course, for an open source project. But how many people are contributing to this project is really great. I mean, it just says how many people are behind it, how many people are actually using it, how many people are developing it. The documentation. I don't know if you looked at other open source projects, for example, Magento, but documentation is something we lack a lot. So finding here the documentation actually helped us so much. We started basically with a very small team of Magento developers that wanted to build OroCRM, and we started from a place where they knew nothing about Symfony. It took us 1 month to start developing. That's it, 1 month. They were up and running. They're good PHP developers. They had good documentation, good resources. Up and running in 1 month, we started writing code for our new product. So that was all great. Just the amount of third-party bundles, open source bundles or not, but that are available around this community is also great. So we use a lot of them. Some shout out to companies like Clip, KNP Labs, Friends of Symfony. We're using your bundles in our product, which is great. But as such, we also know that it puts on us the responsibility to contribute back, and we do. So in Aura, we're actually contributing back fixes that we find to the product itself. We're also creating our bundles, so Aura Doctrine, we just released recently. If you would like to look at that, it's something that we made available as well. So again, just being part of this community, just a great place to be. But last is, or what very important for us, is knowing that there is a commercial entity behind this project. So the fact that SensuLab is backing this framework, is owning what is going on, and is vested in the success of this framework, allows us as a company, we're a commercial company after all, to kind of put a bet on that and know that they're going to be here for a long time, continue developing it and supporting it as we grow. So with that, I just want to also talk about what we're actually doing in Aura CRM. So we talked about the fact that we're building an open source CRM application, but looking back to what we did in Magento and how people actually consumed it and used it in their daily life, taught us that people need more than just the product itself. We found that people were trying to use Magento back then for everything that you expect, but also for stuff that you wouldn't, for things that are not e-commerce. And the reason when we started talking to them was because they felt that that brings them closer to the product that they're trying to build. They're trying to reuse our features that we did there. But it wasn't always easy. Sometimes they were so tightly coupled or so built towards e-commerce that it was not an easy job for them, so they paid a high price. So this time we tried to do something that will help everybody, and we created a new layer between the framework and our application, Aura CRM, and we call it the Aura platform. The idea of that is to build a general purpose platform that allows developers and companies to start from a higher level, not necessarily rebuilding every time features that they reuse all the time for building back office / business applications. And some of these features you probably think about is user management, ACL, password management, navigation. And we also invested a lot in design. If you like our design, if you want to reuse it, it's a very usable design that we created for you. So you can actually take the platform and use it to create your own applications, either internal or if you want to build it as another product. So some of the key features are listed here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but this is just a small piece of what we're actually offering there. And it's released under the MIT license. So you can actually have complete freedom to innovate, build whatever you want around this, and just let us know. We really would love to see what you're doing with that and showcase what we're doing. One of the most important things we actually learned with Magento is that for us to be successful with Magento is to have a successful ecosystem around what we're doing. And being part of Symfony, being part of this ecosystem around here, we want to add more added value to what you can do with this framework, with this application, and with our platform if you choose to. And as such, as other companies that are already using our platform to create their own products, of course, Aura CRM, we're using our own, we're eating our own dog food, as we say, but also Akineo, PIM, which are here today, so you can also talk to them and see what they're doing. They're using the platform to create their own open source product information management system. The Amanta Desk, which is an open source ticketing system using this platform. And that's very exciting to us to see that more and more people are starting to use it. We also know about a lot of companies that are using it for internal projects. So as such, if you want to try it, give it a try. Download the platform, check it out, see what you can do with it, let us know. I'm going to be around here for today if you want to talk to me. You can also check out, we have one of our lead developer, Yevgeny Shishkin, that is going to talk here more depth about what we do. So with that, thank you very much for having me here. Fabien, I'll give it back to you.
So, we're a bit late. I still have probably 10 or 15 minutes talking about stuff about Symfony. We won't have time. And this is probably the most interesting part because this is the part where I talk about how you can help Symfony to get to the next level. Because of course, using an open source project is just consuming the project. It's also about being able to contribute back to the project, being part of the project. It's very important for you as a user to be able to say what you want for Symfony, what you want as a new feature for 2.7 or 3.0, what you think we should modify or improve. And I have 10 simple ideas so that you can start contributing today. And as it's going to take about 10 minutes, I'm not going to talk about that now. I'm going to talk about that tonight during a lightning talk. Right? So I will have 7 minutes to give you my 10 ideas. So that's all for now. Thank you very much.